Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to another episode of Theorycraft Thursday. For those of you joining us for the first time, Theorycraft Thursday is a weekly series for the upcoming collectible card game, Total War Elysium, where I will be diving into certain gameplay topics or design topics. And this week, we are simply going to be addressing the November major update, which just went live today as of my recording. And along with it is a new general, there are some bug fixes. There also are a lot of buffs and nerfs to existing cards and a few new cards being added in as well. So this is going to be a long episode where we're going to dive into all of that. So to kick things off, let's go into game where we are welcomed by the notification for the November major update. And surprise, surprise, we have a third Viking general, Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary Viking king, father to many of the great heathen army, including Ubba, who is a card in the game. So Ubba's father is now a playable general, and along with him are some ship cards. And we've been waiting for these ship cards to arrive so that we can actually have a ship archetype and some ship decks potentially. So this is the first order of business that we have. Now we do have a few things we need to do first. We grab our daily free item. Hoping for coins. Nope, we get a card. Alright, so pretty common thing to happen. We saved up over 2,000 gems, so we're actually going to start things off by opening a legendary battle pack. But before we do that, we already bought the general, and we should take a look at the new cards. So there's a couple new things added. There's now a premium card. So this is the early version of holographic cards. If we take a look at it, you can see that pretty much have this filter on top. Now, I don't think this feels very premium, and hopefully this is just a placeholder for something potentially down the line, because I would rather have the animation move. So maybe she's panting or maybe he's passing by. That would be a much better card design, and I would definitely be willing to spend some crafting materials to unlock that. But in this case, I think the premium cards is simply a filter slapped on all existing cards, doesn't matter the art. Maybe here you can have them shoot, but obviously that takes a lot of work, and that's going to be something the developers will do if they can actually make money on them. Because right now we're in closed beta, there is no shop, there is no real world currency. This is currently a completely free game under development, so I can understand that they're not developing anything that's premium, but the idea here is great. But we can take that off. We're going to look at missing only. And what we want to look at is all the new cards that were added into the game. And there are a couple of them, starting with this Doomed Rear Guard. So we'll do this according to cost. I guess cost, because this is the order that we have. So Doomed Rear Guard is a 1/4 unit belonging to the medieval era. So it's available to all Viking generals and any future medieval general. The 1/4 stat line for a 2 cost is pretty decent by itself, but on top of that, you also have the shatter effect of deploying a short sword, which feels really good. And you also have a polearm tag on it, so for missions such as the polearm missions, I feel like this is a great card, especially for Guthrum, because you can still boost him. And speaking of Guthrum, we'll get back to him a bit later, as this round of buffs and nerfs has seen him being changed again, as the last round of nerfs really killed him. And we're going to see a reversal of that in this one. So this is one of the new cards being added. And then we have the Carve. And the Carve is a 2 cost 2/1 ship. And that's key here. There's going to be a lot of ship cards. And here you have a Herald ability that deploys a Thrall. So you get a 1/1 unit. Now Thrall used to be 1/2, but obviously this has changed along with the patch note, which we'll get into. But if your hand is empty, this Herald ability becomes deploy 3 instead. And I'm assuming you're deploying them on the same line that you're deploying the ship on. So this is probably going to be played on the back line. And you're paying 2 to get at least 2 bodies, right? You have a 2/1 and a 1/1 for 2 cost. Not bad. And optimally, you can play this in a Lagatha deck. And you can get up to 4 bodies. 2/1, 1/1, 1/1, 1/1, and the Thralls obviously has potential to boost attack, although I think that's actually gone. We'll see how much the change is, but right now it just looks like a 1/1 placeholder card, and we'll see if the text is still there. I'm not sure, because I haven't gotten into the actual patch changes yet. But at the very worst, having 4 bodies, if thralls have no effect, then perhaps this would be played directly on the front line. 4 bodies is good for offense and for defense, and I believe 1 health is actually pretty decent. I'll talk about that a bit later, because the general's attack has seen a lot of changes, and I actually think 1 health units is pretty good. And obviously, a blot of the sun will kill everything, but that's a very situational situation, I guess. And moving on, we have Coastal Smugglers. This is a 3 costs, 2/4, and this is an Empire card. So, right, we forgot to talk about this one. This one's Viking only. This one's Empire. So right now, all the French Republic generals and future, Empire generals can utilize the Coastal Smuggler. 3 costs, 2/4. So stat-wise, pretty balanced. And whenever you move a ship to this line, gain a supply. So this effect, I feel like, is a tad weak on Empire, because Empire don't have that many ships. We'll take a look at all the available ship cards very soon after we finish looking at all the new cards, but I think it's not going to be that many. Most of the ship are still concentrated right now on the medieval, and that makes sense because we are introducing a medieval general, so most of the new cards are for medieval generals or Viking generals. This one being Empire is going to be limiting. Now there are ships in the Empire deck. Come to mind, you have the Admiral's flagship and a few other, timeless ships that you could use, but moving them might not be always the optimal thing. And the easiest way to move stuff is with About Face, which is a very common combo with Vigilant Watch for Empire decks. But in that case, both cards will move at the same time, and you wouldn't really be moving any ships into this line unless you have this card played on the leftmost side. Because the logic of the code for the game, register the leftmost card first, moving to the right and down and so forth. So if this is played on the leftmost position, then I think perhaps you will get the supply triggers. But if you play this on the right side and it gets moved after About Face, I think it might not trigger. Now this is me theorycrafting, which is what this episode or this series is about. Hopefully this is how it works in game. Now I do have to complain though, that is not very clear and probably something that needs to be cleared up down the line. But that's just my theory on how this card will work. I don't think it's going to be meta. I don't think you should craft this. This is probably going to be more useful later on once they introduce more ships for the Empire factions as well. Then we have the Penthesilea. This is a famous Greek vessel, and this is given an ancient tag. So both the 3 kingdoms and the Trojan factions, not the Trojan kingdoms, can use this. And that's kind of weird because Penthesilea is definitely a Greek ship, or at least a Mediterranean ship. So I don't know why the 3 kingdoms can't use this, and why junk is timeless rather than 3 kingdoms, which doesn't have junk either. I understand the error's a little bit different, but anyhow, this card works as, and if after a friendly unit is deployed, move it to this line. This is the first card that functions kind of like an open field, but only affect yourself, which makes it actually super valuable. So you pay 3 for a 2/4 body, which is okay. I think cost-wise, that's a decent trade-off. You get a unit out of this, so that's also helpful. And having 4 health means it can survive. It's a ship tag in case you're trying to do some ship synergy with ancient decks. It's possible, but not optimal right now. But the moving effect is quite nice because there are a lot of movement cards, especially for 3 kingdoms, that can utilize this quite well. So I think this can see some play, or maybe you can do some heroic triggers on the back line and then have the unit pop to the front because you have the Penthesilea played. So I think there's a couple options with this. I like this card. I feel like this has a lot of potential. And then moving on, we have Flotilla, and this is a simple spawning card. It's an event card, cost 4 to summon 4 dowels. I don't know how to pronounce that actually, but they're 1/2 ships, and this is a way to get a lot of ships out really fast. With most of these event cards that summon a lot of units, the value is that you only have 1 card in your deck to generate a lot of units of the same type. So whether it's conscription that generates 4 peasants, or it's this card that generates 4 ships. The idea here is it's efficient because it's only 1 card. Now the value of the card is debatable. So it's a 1/2 ship, and most likely you're hoping to use this with some synergy because this is timeless. So you could synergize this with the Coastal Smuggler, have these 4 ships move up to the role that the Coastal Smugglers are in, get 4 supplies next turn, and it's only be a 1-turn effect unless you do the about face with the Coastal Smuggler on the left side, like I mentioned. Then maybe you can get up to 8 supplies next turn, subtract the 4 that you spend on about face, but so forth. It could be quite interesting. Having more bodies obviously help. Having this at 2 health is probably important as well, because we'll talk about Ragnar's ability a bit later. But interesting card. I wouldn't say it's OP or anything, but it's not bad. And then these are old cards that I haven't crafted yet. We have Sea Storm, another card that's designed to counter the thing they're trying to introduce. So we're trying to introduce the ship meta, but now we have this card that replaces every ship with a sailor. So basically shipwrecked, 5 cost to destroy all ships, and in their place you get a 1/1 sailor. So if you're playing only a ship deck and you run into this card, you're doomed, right? Like a Sea Storm. This is just a chance. A mighty armada wiped out at sea. Happens in history. Happens in the card game here. And the 1/1 sailor is not completely useless. You still have a bunch of bodies on the field, but obviously if you have some really high value ships with effects, now they're all gone because they're replaced. So I don't even think you're getting any shattered effects because they're not technically destroyed. We have a very interesting word here, replace. And it says airy, so it means friendly and foe. So if you're playing some ships, this can have an effect on you as well. Pretty interesting design, and the replace keyword might come in handy. Maybe the peasants can be replaced with something stronger. That would be a very interesting build. Then we have Sea Dog. Here we have an old crafty sailor, 3/5 for 5, so stat-wise not so good. Timeless card, Herald ability, give a target friendly ship +1 action. So this card actually could be very good because the +1 action can be used for moving or for just attacking, because there are some very nice abilities on some Empire ships that comes to mind, some with huge splash damage, some that will spawn you round shots, and giving them 1 extra action could be very valuable. And giving extra action seems to be a trend recently, as we have seen some Empire cards getting shifted to do that as well, and this just adds on to that. Now, this being timeless means you can use it for other things, but what I can see is the +1 action is decent. 3/5 stat for this effect on top of that is also not bad, so I think overall pretty decent card. I wouldn't say this is a bad card. And then let's see, new cards. Here we go. The Holy Protectors. So deploys 2 Temple Guards, heroic, deploy additional 1. So once again, a spawning card, except for in this case, it's a very expensive spawning card. It costs 7. This spawns unit that are shielded, 3/2 units that are shielded, and you can get up to 3 of them if you play this on empty line. Is this good value? Well, first is Temple Guard, 3 cost, 3/2 shielded, good value. Would you ever put this card in your deck? Maybe, but maybe not. I'm leaning towards the maybe not camp. Would I care to do this when it's not heroic? Definitely not. If I don't want one of them for 3. Now obviously part of that reason is we're limited to 18 cards per deck, so having this take up a slot, it's gonna be hurting you. But if you spawn 2 for 7 costs, obviously not good value. If you spawn 3, then I guess you're winning a little bit. Would I get 3 of these for 7? I think I would. That feels pretty strong. Shielded, I feel like has more value because of something that happened to generals, which we'll look at very soon. So, debatable. I wouldn't mind getting it, but I don't know if this will fit in any of the existing decks. Moving on, we have Gnar. I'm gonna hope the case silent. It's a raid card. That's a ship that is common for 6 for 7, so stat wise you're losing out a ton, but the effect is amazing. Daybreak. If your hand is empty, draw 3 cards. So this can be used for a lot of Viking decks. I think even Lagatha could use this, because this could be the turn 2 finisher or day 2 finisher, right? So you are on the edge of wiping out your opponent. Your Lagatha is probably at 3-4 attacks. You don't really need it to push it any farther. You're hoping to draw out some direct damage just to finish off the general. So having this being played right before the Daybreak is going to be very valuable. You get a nice body. You're probably playing it for 6 or less because of the raid. I don't think you're going to be forced to play this as 7. It's pretty easy to generate raid with Lagatha decks. And then you get to refresh your hand, get 3 extra cards, draw 1 extra during the Daybreak. So it's basically +4 cards swing, and then you can try to finish off your opponents the turn after. And if you get popped to last gasp, like you're at 7 health, like we're talking about really optimal situations. You're still at 7, you're 4-7, you hit the opponent to last gasp, you're trying to finish him off. This would be the card to help you win it. So I feel like this is pretty good. Now, if you don't trigger the Daybreak, then it's not as good, sure. But the threat of Daybreak, I think, will push opponents to take care of this card. They would try to kill it. Because if somehow you're able to trigger it, it's a huge swing. So at the very worst, it will help you tank up 6 damage. So I think that's very valuable. And you can obviously add, False Dawn. Now, we're not talking about Lagatha deck at this point. If we're talking about False Dawn, we're talking about maybe Guthrum, maybe the new general. The new general, I think False Dawn might be his kryptonite, but we'll see about that. Interesting card. And then we have the Drums Viking. It's basically a lieutenant, or I guess this depicting as a knight. So this is a very powerful Viking figure, and it's a 3/6 unit that's a legendary. I believe this is the only legendary card being introduced in this new patch, and it's a very good card in my opinion. So it does cost 7. The stat doesn't look that impressive. 3/6. It gets +2 actions, so 3 actions total. So potentially you can hit 3 times for 9 damage with this card. That feels pretty good. And the effect is whenever a friendly ship moves to its line, this gains shield. So if you have a ton of ships, all you need to do is refresh the shield between each attack, and this card will, deal out damage without taking any damage back. So massing ship seems to be the thing for ship decks and forcing out some movements. So that's kind of the goal here, and I feel like this card, if built correctly, can be a very powerful piece and very hard to remove piece, because you can play this card on the back line where it's kind of safe, and then just move a ship to it so that it gets the shield on summon. And then the very next turn, you can spend 1 action to move up, and you still have 2 actions to attack, and the ship that moved over to protect it can be moved back to protect it again. And if you have other ships, you can do the same thing. So I feel like this is a pretty good card, and if you do combo it well, it can be a nightmare to remove. And with 6 health, there's not many things that can really deal with it, unless you have, Pyrrhic Victory or some very amazing board clear that can go through a shield. Because all the board clear that we know, whether it's no quarters, whether it's regime change, requires them to receive some wounded action. Whether to wound them ahead of time, then no quarter, or to drop them to 1 and then do damage to get rid of them. In this case, because they will probably have a shield on summon, if you planned it out correctly, then it's going to be hard to get rid of this card. And I think that adds a lot of value. And then some ships that we didn't add from before. And that's it. That's all the new cards that are added in. So let's see if we can get any of these new cards from a legendary battle pack. Fingers crossed. We'll get 12 common, 8 rare, 2 epic, 1 legendary, and 500 crafting material. And nope. Okay. Expected. Nope. Okay. And then 2 epic. Alright, so a full duplicate set would be amazing. There we go. I have too many cards. So we got the minimum value from a legendary pack. Not gonna sweat it. We're gonna be resetting after, closed beta is over. That means I'm just going to have to craft some cards later on to check out some of these new cards and make a new deck for the new general. And speaking of the new general, who's right here, Ragnar, let's take a look at him. So Ragnar here joins our medieval Viking faction. And if we take a look at him as a general, he's a 220 general. So for those of you coming from the last patch, you realize this is the first 2-attack general that we had in the game. And yes, that makes him fairly strong just from that. Now the reason why having an extra attack is good is because all the trade patterns that the enemy can do to you gets ruined. So previous cards like, say, War Dog, that was 3-2. That can pretty much guarantee to stun the enemy once and potentially force them to get rid of it or get stunned again. Can't do that anymore. The War Dog smash into you, you do get stunned, you take 3 damage, but the War Dog is dead. Similarly, for other units that have only 2 health, or even if they have 3 health, they're less tankier than before because the mere act of attacking your general makes them worse off. And if you're playing a general that has only 1 attack, then trading into this general also makes it worse off because you're losing health on the trade. The net health for you is -1 when you attack Ragnar. You're basically giving him an extra attack. So unless you have other things supporting your aggro strategy, you don't really want to be attacking straight into him for a trade. Now there are some drawbacks to his high attack, and that is he has a daybreak effect. This attacks each adjacent ally. That could be very problematic because when you attack them, they attack back. So if your allies have damage, you're going to be tanking that during every daybreak. So you're almost on a clock, or you have to be very smart about placement. And the situation here is going to become, if the opponent can control your daybreak through false dawn, then you could be in a lot of trouble. But if you play it wisely and put yourself in good positions, there can be some really good effects out of this, because there are a lot of self-damaging cards within the medieval Viking card group, including fray, that could benefit from having your general trigger one of the draws during each daybreak, and you only take 1 damage back. So there are some potentials here, and then if you add on effects like the religious fanatic that gains extra stats anytime a unit or a friendly ally survives damage, not including the general, so structure and units, then this could synergize with that as well. And his signature card is Avenge. This gives a target ally shattered, deploy a Skeed. And what is a Skeed? Skeed is a 2/2 ship, and basically it's another ship to throw away or to move. It's nice to have, but you are basically using 3 cost to give an effect that's delayed to summon one. So I'm not sure how good it is. Depends on how much ship synergies you have. So if you have a lot of ship synergies and you can make any card give you a ship, then obviously that has a lot of value because you always have Avenge available to you. So there could be situations where this would be very high value because you can combo it with, like, say, Sea King, and this ski can become +2 attack for something that's quite powerful. Debatable. We'll see once we get more chances to play with him, but he has his obvious drawbacks. And speaking of this +2 attack, we're going to have to talk about some of the other generals because a lot of things got changed. Penthesilea lost 2 of her health points and gained 1 attack. She's 218. It's a very weird situation for her. This obviously on the surface feels like a buff, but the 2 health that you lose could be quite bad. Let me explain. If you think about it, the direct competitor to Penthesilea, as in whether you want to make a deck with her or not, is really King Priam and Agamemnon, because they share the same card pool. Now obviously each have different unique abilities, so it's going to be a little bit different, but in terms of deck construction, the cards available to them are the same. Now, what is Agamemnon? He's a 122 general that can be moved around freely and can attack with short range, so he doesn't have to trade his health into the enemy when you trade. So that's very good. And what about King Priam? Priam, if played correctly, is basically a 217 general that can't attack, but can heal basically 2 health a turn, or at least absorb 2 health a turn. So a 2 health barrier every turn, plus 2 attack, and if you're at 217, you're quite close to Penthesilea's 218. So, I don't know. You can't heal with her as well, and because you don't have the mobility of Agamemnon, you also don't have a good way to consistently heal. And a lot of healing got nerfed, a lot of massive healing got nerfed, but some incremental healing got buffed. So it's going to be a little weird. I have tested her out. You could play a super aggro style with her, but I feel like aggro overall got a lot weaker. Also because of cards like her who got 2 attack, because now you can trade back pretty easily. Then moving on, we have a few more big changes to generals. Sun Ren here, if we take a look at what she spawns, Sun Attendants got nerfed. It went from a 1-3 to a 2-2 to a 1-2, which I feel like makes her absolutely horrible right now, because 1-2 can't trade into generals twice anymore. Even 2-2 can't trade into generals twice anymore, depending on who you're up against, of course. If you're up against, Marie, or if you're up against Dong or Davol, then obviously you can still trade twice. But against those new generals with those 2 attacks, you're out of luck. These only get 1 attack. And would you really want to spawn a bunch of these unless you have a very consistent way of boosting them? It's kind of forcing certain decks to play boost your minion style. And I don't know that actually fits her, or it's not an easy deck to play. She had an easier time when her Superintendent was actually strong. So I feel like Surin dropped a lot in this patch. And then I don't think we have any major changes for any of these generals, but Guthrum's back. Hit and run is back to 1 cost. The only difference here is the +1 attack only lasts for the turn that you use it, and then it gets daybreaked at the end of the day. That part's the same, but you can't stack this +1 attack, which I feel like it's a justified change because previously it was very strong, but it's still a very good card now because you can utilize this on day 1 and on targets that you don't mind coming back to your hand. So you're pretty much only going to use this maybe at the end of the day before the daybreak triggers, so it will have the exact same effect as before, and it still costs 1, which I feel like is the big key. And a lot of cards within the medieval and Viking factions got a small buff, so I think overall Guthrum might be back here and be a very viable choice. Of course, you should definitely try out the new general too. Lagatha didn't get any major change on herself, but there's going to be some change on key cards. Davol got a change. As I mentioned, I actually gave this idea to them to try to give this card a planned effect. This wasn't the planned effect I had in mind or I suggested, but I think it will do. So now there's 2 changes. One, the Palisade can be played on any line. Used to be always on the front, and that was a problem because you might want this to guard the backline flanks. Now you can do that. The other problem with this was that Palisades are terrible. The enemy, if they're not forced to remove your Palisades, will simply let you keep them on the field and let them occupy a precious slot. Here, you can have this planned, and it can help trigger other cards that can utilize planned effect, where you don't play this card and just have it planned to trigger those effects, or you get a slightly stronger Palisade. I think 2-3 is much better than 1-2, obviously, and you don't have to pay extra for that. You pretty much have this at the end of the day, don't use it the turn before daybreak, and then you have a better version of it. My suggestion before was to spawn a random structure, which would have been much more fun. And if you have a high cost structure, then demolition becomes a viable card because you don't want to demolition a palisade. It does 1 damage, doesn't do anything. You want to boost the supply cost of the card, even if it's a castle wall. 0-9, stats much worse, but you get 3 costs right there. Now, obviously 0-9 is very tanky, but 2-3 that can spawn every turn is pretty good. Oh, actually every day, not every turn. So Devote got a small change. I don't think it's going to do much. Oh, there's another small change. Now all signature cards will count as a hand slot even if you use it. Therefore, you are going to get to Knight cards a little quicker, 1 turn quicker. Even if you use Iron Defense on the turn before you get the Knight card, you will still get the Knight card effect when you draw the next card. So that helps him a little. So these could potentially be, 3-4. Not that it's that amazing, but it's a nice touch. Then Marie got a change as well. Looks the same, right? Let's look at Revolt. Revolutionary Mob is now 320. That's the only change. And after looking at that change, that's the deck I made, because I feel like that's super strong. 320 is insane. There's not many cards that can trade into you, and because the general's attacks are going up with this patch change, a lot of the units lost a lot of value, in my opinion. Like War Dog lost a ton of value, but a lot of spell cards or event cards, let's say Blot Out the Sun, which not a huge damage, but let's say Calibrated Awareness that does 3 damage, let's say Stray Arrow that does 2 damage, directly to a target becomes much more valuable, because you can't afford to always trade into the generals. But if you can hit them with these event cards, you're doing the same exact trade as you were doing before, and you're going to be better off. So that's all the changes to the generals. Let's move on to talk about card changes. So the first card, I think this is by alphabetic order, that got changed is Achilles. So Achilles was changed twice already now. Used to be 9-1, and I think it costed 10. They dropped it to 9 cost. They upped the attack to 10. And now it gets +1 action. So I think now this card is strong. The drawback is it costs 9. But in the late game, if you play Achilles, and this applies to the card itself, so if you play him on an empty line, he becomes unbreakable, which got a separate buff where Pyrrhic Victory no longer can remove unbreakable cards. So unbreakable cards are immune from Pyrrhic Victory, which means there are no board clear in the game that can get rid of unbreakable cards. Unless the unbreakable card was already wounded, then no quarters probably could get rid of it, but Achilles can never be wounded because he only has 1 health. You can still kill it with Demoralize, because that's a stat change. That's not really damage to it. But assuming that's not the situation you're going to be running into, because Demoralize has fallen off the meta for a long time since it got changed. You don't really see a lot of Demoralize nowadays because it's limited to only targeting units, so it lost a ton of value. But in this situation, Achilles is pretty much unkillable the turn you play it. And then you move him so that you open up the line that was empty when you played him, and then you play something else there, and then you still have 1 action to attack. So I feel like that's pretty good. And the unbreakable lasts till the following turn, or the end of the following turn, which means, you're going to get some decent damage from Achilles. And 10 is no joke. And being unbreakable and dealing this damage is key, because generals got stronger. So now you have this card that can kind of sustain itself if the enemy don't have any solutions, which there are not many solutions for Achilles. We just mentioned the only thing that can really stop him is Demoralize. Very strong card. I feel like there's a lot of value here. Then Aide de Camp got a huge nerf. It no longer heals both generals back to full. It will only heal 9 health to both generals on each daybreak. The card itself got more stats. It became a 3-5 units. So the idea here is you want multiple days of healing. And you want to try to keep this alive to have sustained healing every day. Or if you have False Dawn, sustained healing every daybreak. But this becomes a lot weaker, and relying on this card to reset becomes a lot more difficult. Then we have a change to Angry Mob, which is a card that we talked about. The 6/6 change made it too strong. I didn't get a chance to showcase that deck that I made for this, but if you can play this on curve, it's a wonderful card. There's not much that can stop it, and now being 5/6 makes it a little bit better. The drawback still hurts because the enemy can't get rid of it. You also can't get rid of it. So if you let this live for 2 turns, 3 turns, you're not going to have a board. This is going to be your only card. So that is going to be a drawback. And having a drop 1 attack definitely make it slightly less desirable. Of course, if you're featuring a deck with Religious Fanatic, that card could survive through this and keep gaining +1/+1. So you could get a pretty powerful deck if you planned out where all your units are high health. Then you could have a wonderful trigger to have a very strong Religious Fanatic out of Angry Mob, which could still very well be a card or a deck that we will feature very soon, because I feel like this card deserves some attention. And then we have Conscription changed again. Now the reason why Conscription is getting a buff, it's very simple, because Town Conscriptor here exists. This got changed recently, where the card itself drop cost, drop stats, and it triggers on the Herald ability where it deploys 2 peasantry. So essentially you're paying 4 to get 3 bodies all the time. This card used to be 4 cost, planned, deploy 4, unplanned, deploy 3. So if you want to use Conscription on day 1, you have to luck out and pull it out with Extraordinary Advance so that you can have it planned already to summon 4 things that are 1/1 with range. If it's on the back line, they're not going to die fast, or if the enemy has a spell like Blot Out the Sun, they can all die, and the point is to have them die for Marie. So Town Conscriptor has a much better offering for that position, because you play this at the end of day 1, you get 3 bodies on the front that all have damage, that all can trade, and when they die, that's 3 death towards the revolt, whereas Conscription can't guarantee the 4 bodies, so there was no advantage on that. And if you only get 3 1/1 with range, it's not as good as 2/2, 1/2, 1/2 on the front that are all peasantry. So the peasantry can also synergize with other cards from Marie. So overall, Town Conscriptor was better. Now I'm not saying this is bad, because I realize that Citizen Soldier is also peasantry. So eventually you can boost this if you're playing this late game and you want a bunch of ranged units. It could work, but this was the competition, and Conscription was losing that battle. So now it's getting a huge change to 5 costs, which means it's a day 2 card, which is probably where it should be, because you need to hang on to this card during day 1 to play it on day 2 for the plan effect, and you're basically paying 5 to get 5. And I think that's okay. I probably still won't play it, because during day 2, if I played my day 1 correctly, Marie is already transforming, so I don't need this anymore. I can spawn my own peasantry and boost them with my new signature card, and they can all become range and maybe splashed range, which are much better than these 1/1. So that's just a thought. And then we have another small change to Court Eunuch. This was just an underutilized card. I think this is a reversal. I vaguely remember Court Eunuch being 1/3 a long time ago, and it was nerfed to 1/2, and now it's back to 1/3. Not a big change, it's just underutilized. I think the card lacks some creativity, because you don't get any benefit from having this attack your own general. Now you can have it attack it twice, maybe 3 times, and draw 3 cards, depending on how you buff it with Mandate, because you might be giving it more health or even more attack, which could be a disaster for your general. I don't know how Court Eunuch fit in. I had the thought of playing this with certain decks, but now that it's 3 health, might not be a good idea anymore, especially since some attendants are pretty terrible. Then we talk about Devol's change, but alongside Devol's change is obviously the Camel change. The Camel Nomad has been a nightmare for many players, or a joy for some, but it's been changed completely. Now at the start of your turn, each player will shuffle a random card from their hand into their deck. If they did, they would draw a card. So it's a toned down version. Only 1 card per turn. You can still trigger some of the synergies, and it's only a random effect. You can't shuffle your whole hand in, get a bunch of supply back. That synergy is now limited to 1 a turn. The attack and health is reverted back from 2-3 to 4-5, which was the original stat, which is good because this is cavalry. Although I did notice they lost flanking, didn't they? So much text and flanking doesn't fit, but still here. Okay, so that's interesting. But that's good. If they lost flanking, it's a terrible card. 4-5 cavalry with some cool effects here. Now the randomness of the one card could be a bad thing if you think about it. Because if you're getting the whole hand shuffled, then the chance of you pulling a card you need again is still pretty high. Now if that card gets removed, you're in trouble. So that's the camel change. Then we have another change to a very popular card that people are going to cry about, and that's Dawn Raid. Dawn Raid lost the draw card ability. So now your hand costs 1 less this turn. Same effect as before, but you can no longer draw a card. That's actually pretty bad. So it used to be auto-include every day. You would just take this card because it's a 2-cost refresher. You always reduce at least 1 cost on your own signature card, and you always reduce 1 cost on the new card you draw. So it's at least net even. Even if this is your only card, you're not going to lose any supply playing it, and you get to see the next card. So it was really good value. Now, it's only good if you build up a big hand and you want to play some combo. And by talking about big hand, we're talking about 3 or more cards. If you only have 2 cards playing this, you're just even. So I don't think this is a Lagathar card anymore. This is probably a Guthrum or Ragnar's card. Because if you're playing as Lagathar, on day 1, you might use this card. But beyond day 1, I don't think you want to draw this card. Because your hand's already empty. Drawing this card, playing it, means you lost supply. Because you paid 2 to drop your signature card by 1, which is terrible. So, big issue here. Then we have a change to Persuasion. That's Dong Zhuo. So we did forget one thing about General. Dong Zhuo got a small change. Persuasion used to be 1 cost. 1 random card in your hand cost 2 less. Now it's 2 cost. 2 random cards in your hand cost 1 less. This on paper feels like a worse change because you're paying 1 extra. But there are situations where this is better because A, you are now getting 2 cards reduced. So a lot of combos that we're talking about for Dong Zhuo requires 2 cards or more. So you could have a better chance of lucking into the card that you want to get reduced. And on top of that, when it used to be pay 1, reduce 2 cost, if you had a 1 cost card in your hand, let's say Blot Out the Sun, I love to use that card as an example, but that card would cost 1. If it gets reduced by 2, it will cost 0. So you wasted 1 of your cost. Here, because this will never trigger on 0 cost cards, you will never waste any of your reductions. So, could be better. If you don't have 2 cards in your hand, it's worse. If you don't have 2 cards that cost more than 0, also worse. But those are other cases we have to consider. So interesting change. I don't know this is going to help or make it worse. We're just going to have to go on and see. Because most Dong Zhuo deck just drag things out, and then hits you with some game-ending combo, and it's game over. And I don't know how Persuasion fit into that, because it wasn't essential before. It helped you speed up some of your combos. But now, like for the Scribe combo, it doesn't help. Because previously, if you get the randomness on the Scribe and you had the Conceal, you can start doing that combo on turn 4. Now, or turn 5, right? Because you have to pay 1 for the Persuasion. Now you can't really do that. Like if you have 6 supplies, you just do the Scribe combo straight up. You wouldn't pay 2 for this. Because the Scribe combo doesn't require any 1 cost cards. Therefore, this is not as good in that situation. But that's the only one that comes to my mind right now. Alright, back to cards. What is next is the Whirling Duel. And that is actually a great change. A lot of cards in Medieval and Viking got really good changes. Oh, Dawn's Raid. If you're a Lagatha player, rest in peace. But here, Whirling Duel is now a 0-cost card, and I feel like if you are a 0-cost card, you have so much value in the game, especially if you're an event card, because Scribe exists. So you could now pump out some sort of mid-game to late-game deck with Guthrum or Ragnar, or if you're very inventive with your, Lagatha, where you don't boost her attack, which I don't know if it's called inventive or like counterculture. I mean, it's not good. Let's not talk about her. If you're playing Guthrum or you're playing as Ragnar, this will be great because you can now pull out the Scribe combo with this, with Conceal. You can exchange your target's attack and health, especially if you're playing a lot of these high health units that exist for a lot of these medieval deck. This is wonderful. And anytime you have a 0-cost card, I think it has insane value because it can fit in with any combo. There's no restriction on it. Then Flogger also got a change. So Herald deal 1 damage to each adjacent unit and structure. They gain 2 attack. Previously, it doesn't increase the attack on the structure. It was only units. So it also didn't do damage to structure. So you can't target Friary, I believe, even though that's what we wanted to for it to do. But now, like, the Friary will get increased attack. So if it's on the front line, it'll be tankier, as in, you have more attack to trade back. And overall, I think this makes this card better. It also makes a lot of self-damaging decks better for medieval factions, so we're going to see a lot of that. I'm kind of glad I didn't showcase the Angry Mob deck in the past, because now we have a lot more tools, and we can do some sort of, self-inflicting pain deck, and that should be fun. Before I get all the ship cards, because as you can see, we didn't get any on Legendary Pack. Then Greedy Sellsword also got a change. It lost 1 supply cost, small buff, good card. I think it fits in a lot of stall decks. A lot of late game deck could use this because you can play this quite early actually. If you're playing a Vineyard deck, and pretty easy to do this. And if you're playing the new Camel with Supply Train, this could also work with that. With the old Camel, this was basically free if you can get the enemy to gain extra supplies. Right, sorry, so this is enemy supplies. So this is really good against enemies with Supply Train, not your own Supply Train, and not your own Vineyard. But overall, even if you're playing this for 8, having 6 of these spawn, just having the bodies in the late game, is worth it. Even though value-wise you think you're losing out, you're really not. Then moving on, Guillotine got a small change. Guillotine is now 2 damage instead of 1, which is fine. I feel like that wasn't what made this card good, but the Daybreak effect's the same. It just makes it slightly better in terms of trading back. Then moving on, we have a change to the Heavy Crossbowman, which I think is actually a good change. So the Heavy Crossbowman used to be mandate gain stun this turn. Now you just have to mandate it once and it will always have the stun. In that case, I feel like this card might be better and opens up some possible stun decks, which has always been an idea that's floated around. I think before Surin had a viable strategy, stun deck was kind of the thing for her, because you have so many good stun cards in the ancient era that you can maybe pull this off. And I think now with this, we can definitely give it a shot, especially if we think about this card that exists, right? This card gains 1 attack whenever an enemy is stunned. Works very well in ancient decks. Out of position, that entire line, if you stun 6, this gains 6 attack. Pretty insane. Alright, and then moving back to the cards that we have, cards that got changed. Hector also got a change. Achilles isn't the only one who got buffed. We don't have Hector, but basically got 1 extra attack. Not a huge change, but not a bad change either. Would I play him? I don't have him, but even if I had him, I don't know if I would play him. Once again, this has a stun effect, so we could pull off the same combo we just talked about. But because this is a legendary, you can only do this once, and it's a very good defender card. So basically anything that wants to touch that line, you stun it right off, so you delay it by another turn. Obviously this is great for Priam decks, so maybe it's good. Especially if you're playing Fall of Troy Priam, I think that would be very good. You would want this to come out for free. That would be amazing. Then we have a pretty harsh change to a very powerful early game card. Very, very powerful. In the Horse Scout. Horse Scout used to be 1-3. Now it's a 1-2 with fast. Could be better, could be worse, depending on who you're facing off. If you're facing off against one of those 2 attack generals, you're doomed. You're pretty much a suicidal 1 attack unit. If you're faced off against Marie, if you're faced off against Napoleon, if you're faced off against, I don't know, Priam, who doesn't buff himself, Zhuo, Zhuo, it's better because you can do the attack on the turn you play yourself, and you can keep attacking because you don't have to trade back. So it's not strictly worse. It's still very powerful because of the flanking. Now with fast, it could be good as well. If you use this in Penthesilea, which was what was used for, it's now a 2-2. When you play it on the first turn, still good. So not a bad change. Then moving on, we have Huskar, which got a small change, not a big change. It went from 9-7 to 10-7. Now notice how the attacks keep moving up. We had those, like, the move to 9 attack. A lot of cards got 9 attack. Now a lot of cards getting 10 attack. This is always a pretty decent card because it has the shield effect. And now being 10 attack makes it better. I wouldn't say it's a bad change, but I think it's a strong card still. The high cost obviously is the factor that's kind of discouraging from using it. But I feel like in the late game, you definitely want this every day. Speaking of medieval cards, the Javelier also got a change. It's no longer 0-2, it's now 1-2, but it also increased the cost to 2. The ping damage is still there, which I feel like it's what was giving it value. And now the card itself is 1-2. If you combine that with the new Guthrum, you will play this on turn 2 when you have 2 supplies. And then turn 3, right before daybreak, you would boost this and then trade when it's 2-2. And then it gets back to your hand and rinse and repeat. I think for Guthrum, this is a buff. For others, this is not a buff because the draw of this card was a body you can throw to the front. Let's say you were playing this in a Marie deck. You play this as a 0-2 to die and also to ping 1 damage. It was good, but now cost 2 might be a little pricey to only get 1 body because what matters for Marie is body count. You're trying to kill as many of your own units as possible. Now for other generals, it's going to be situational. Sometimes having a little bit of stats help. But overall, the big draw is this Herald ability, and that's still there. So I think it's still viable. Then we have Last Stand, which saw a little bit of a nerf. Used to be 3 health, draw a card. I still think this card is wonderful. 3 health was too good to be true, I guess, because draw a card is what you want. As you notice, a lot of draw a card cards got nerfed, like say Menace, which we'll see very soon, but before Menace, Dawn's Raid, completely removed. So losing 1 health is okay. I feel like this is still a very strong card. If you're playing a lot of the counterattack decks or with Whirling Duel being 0 cost now, this is basically +2 attack, possible. And also draw a card, very good. So definitely event card, scribe combo. I think there's something there. I'll test it out. Maybe we'll make something interesting from there. But moving forward, Marauder also got a change. So the change here is Raid is gone. So it will cost 2, but you get 2 supply back. 1 on Herald, 1 on Shattered. So it's a delayed boost. But without Raid, you can't use this card to magically invent a supply. On the turn you play it, you pretty much got a 2-2 for free, and then you got 1 supply on top of that. That was simply too strong for Lagatha. So as you can see, Lagatha is getting nerfed pretty hard in this patch. And we already kind of hinted at the Menace effect. Oh wow, there's a lot of men. There we go. There's only 1 Mina. Menace here used to be move a target, unit or general. Now only back. So if they're on the front, they can go back. If they're on the back, you can't target them. So this obviously hurts because the most common use and the most deadly use of Menace is if the enemy general is hiding in the back,
you pulled them up, and then you killed them. And this is a okay change in my mind for the balance of the game, because you felt really bad when that happened to you, obviously. And this card is a pretty auto-include because it has a draw a card ability. And on top of that, because a lot of the healings got nerfed, I think the direction of the game is kind of ready moving into end faster. Like, you can't reset with AD Camp anymore. It's pretty much not reliable. With only 9 health, it's not that big of a difference, and you rarely can do it twice. And on top of that, without being able to pull the general up, so that kind of counter each other. You take away a tool to kill, you take away a tool to heal, and I think we're relatively in the same spot. Let's just put it that way. Would I play this card in a lot of decks? Depends. Because if you're playing a stall deck, let's say you're playing Priam, where you play out of position. Is this that different from out of position? Not really. When you're playing this on curve, on turn 3, the enemy has maybe 1-2 threats on the front. Throwing them back to the back line is essentially a stun, because they have to spend the next turn's action moving it back. Therefore, it could still work. And situationally, if the enemy general only has one thing in the front protecting it, this will do the job. Like pulling the general up, you throw the other unit back and the general is exposed. It could still work. So it's not a complete nerf, but it's definitely a nerf. I think for a lot of aggro deck, it's less good, but for control deck, it's just as good, because you would move the enemy back. You know, that buys you a turn. Essentially a mini stun with a draw. Then we have Religious Fanatic, which saw another change, which I'm kind of amazed, because I feel like it's already kind of strong. It was 2/2, and you know, whenever a friendly unit or structure survives damage, it gains +1/+1. Now it's 1/3. So survivability up, and you can have more time to build it up in case the enemy want to get rid of it. It can survive stray arrows, it can survive tramples now. So that is a good sign, and very strong card. If we're ever going to make that self-inflicting deck, this would be the centerpiece. Then moving on, we have a few more changes. Saga got changed. I don't have Saga. It's a legendary card. It's 7 cost raid, draw 3 cards. Now it's 8 cost. And that's because it was kind of overperforming according to their data. But I don't know if that data is trustworthy, because not many players have this card and very few players run this card. And now I feel like there's a competitor to this card, right? We just saw a card during Daybreak that can draw 3 cards, which is what this legendary card does. And that card had raid as well and give you a 4/6 body, and you can take it every single day. And if you have False Dawn, you can trigger it every single day or every single turn. So I don't know if this is as good. You had to empty your hand for that one, so you don't want to trigger it every single turn, I guess, because then you have to play out your 3 cards the very next turn. But maybe that's possible. Who knows? Maybe that's a new meta for Lagatha. You know, you have a bunch of cheap cards, you use that to draw a bunch of cheap cards, you get rid of your cheap cards, you False Dawn again, and you somehow gain, 2 attack. But that's just dreaming here, but that's the big change. And then we have Sea King, which is probably the centerpiece of this new meta. Anyways, we have Sea King. Wait, why is it not just showing us Sea King? Is it one word? Do I have it wrong? Well, it's right here, but why are all of these showing up? Anyhow, it's now 1/5. It used to be 2/4. So once again, survivability went up, which is great because it's a boosting card. And whenever a ship gets moved to its line, it gains +2 in flanking. Not for that turn, forever. This card becomes a flanking card after you move one ship to its line. So if it's on the front line and enemy have range units, this card becomes invincible to those right after you move a ship to its line. And then it can keep gaining attacks. It's a strong card. For 3 cost, 1/5 is already decent stat. And then you have this effect on top. With all the ships being introduced, going to be very strong. And then another change is Second Wind, which got a buff. Used to be restore 3 health to any line, now it's 4. Good card. You saw how much the AD camp got changed. This is going to be the AD camp for medieval decks. Medieval decks stands out above all decks because it has healing. You take this every single day. By day 3, 12 points of heal to your general. In the worst case situation where you don't need to heal your units. That's insane. So basically every day your general has 4 more effective health. Assuming you can draw it out, which comes back to the point. That scribe deck idea right now is going to make sense very soon. Then we have a few more changes. Swing attendant change we already talked about, so we're going to skip over her. The Brave got a big change. We don't have the Brave. The Brave used to be just summon 3 of the 18th Liga. Now has a new plant effect to summon 4. That makes more sense because we talked about how the supply curve didn't make sense, and because you will want to summon these and then have a daybreak occur where the 18th Liga becomes 3/2 camouflage melee, not even range, which is another issue. But so that's kind of what you wanted. Now you get 4 of them, and with the plan effect, the 6 cost now makes a little bit of sense. You take this day 1 potentially, you play this day 2 right before day 3, because 6 cost makes sense right there in that 6 turn right before the daybreak. And then you have these spawn, you have 4 of them, you basically get 4 3/2s, which is a lot better value for a 6 cost. And comparing that to some situations, just to think about whether this is worth it, you get 4 3/2 camouflage for 6, but it needs to go through a plan phase. You need to take this on day 1, and then it needs to survive the turn through the daybreak. Or think about the Holy Water card we looked at. 7 cost, heroic for 3 3/2 with shield. I think that card's better than this card right here. So, but they're different errors, but still, that's why the Brave needed a buff and probably deserved this one. The Old Guard got a change as well. I think I have the Old Guard. Don't know why. Maybe it has trouble with 2-word searches, but the Old Guard here used to be 6/8 and +2/+2 for plan card. If you have a plan card in your hand, now it's +2/+2 for each other plan card in your hand. So essentially, when you play this card, it will look at how many plan cards you have in your hand and you will gain that effect. And that's pretty good. I feel like that's better than what it was before. Assuming you have 2 plan card, right? Because you're drawing even when you're at 2. With Devol with the new plan card, I feel like this is a day 3 card, obviously. 8 costs right after that second day. So you had to stash up a bunch of your plan cards, and then you would just play this, and then you have all your calibrated wardness in your hand to use. Pretty much that's kind of the idea. And possibly a good card. We'll see. Whenever enemy attacks your general, this attacks it. That's not a bad thing. Alright. Then we have the Young Guards, which I don't have, so let's go crafting. The Young Guard also got a change. So the Young Guard is to Daybreak, gain 2 attack. Now it's Daybreak, gain 1 action. We talked about how action's the new thing, and this makes sense. I feel like by giving 1 action, it becomes much better than gaining 2 attack. 6/6 versus 4/6 with 2 action. 4/6 with 2 action every time, because you can attack up to 2 targets, 2 different targets. And if you're attacking the same target, you're dealing 8 instead of 6. So much more flexibility, much stronger Daybreak effect, and it's repeatable. So you go from 2 action to 3 action to 4 action if you can stack it up. And that's kind of the change here. Then we have Vigilant Watch, which we do have, and I spelled it wrong. So Vigilant Watch only got a text change. So the effect's exactly the same. It used to say deal 2 damage, and they changed it to be more consistent where it says deal its damage. The effect's exactly the same. The change here means if you can boost your Vigilant Watch, it will deal more damage on move. So it's technically a buff, but it exposes this card to future nerfs, because now the door is open to change Vigilant Watch to a 1/4. Because that's fine, because you might have ways to buff it. but it will do a lot less. And I think that's what's going to happen to this card. I'm predicting it right now. This card is going to get nerfed to 1 attack, and then you're going to have to find ways to boost it back up. But I think that's a cool idea. It's a fair change. Enjoy it while you can. I'm pretty sure this is coming down. Then we have War Clerk, which I don't think I have. I don't think I ever crafted it. It's one of the relatively new cards. And basically, it used to be 5 cost. Herald, gain +1/+1 for each card in hand. It's seeing a rise in win rate, which is the reason why they kind of changed it. But now it's 6 cost. I think it's decent. I mean, now with your planned card always counting your hand, even if you use it, it helps this card a little bit. But you're probably playing this max on curve, so you probably didn't use your playing card unless you're playing someone like Agamemnon, which you use it every turn, where you might, mistime yourself. But overall, okay card. I think it's okay on curve, terrible late, unless you play like a scribe combo, so you keep having cards in your hand. Regardless, I think it's average. I probably wouldn't spend my material on it first. And then finally, we have only 2 more changes. We're almost done. The Wild Geese, which is right here. The Wild Geese here has this cost drop to 7 from 8. I think it was pretty good as an 8 cost. It was very unique in filling out your hands. It's still very good at 7. And then we have one final change to the Sea Lion Cavalry, which I don't have. Surprise, I might craft this. So Sea Lion Cavalry has a pretty big change. Used to be a 4/6 cavalry that says whenever you play another card, this gains +1/+1 and stun this turn. That's the old text. So 4/6 +1/+1 stun this turn. Now, whenever you play another card, this gains 1 attack this turn, but it's a 1/8 with stun. So you always have stun at 1/8. So very high survivability cavalry with stun, and you can increase the attack based on how many cards you play. And this is a great card for Dong Zhuo and a very good design because Sea Lion Cavalry was Dong Zhuo's, famous unit. Also, Dong Zhuo's from the Sea Lion region, and it's his faction unique unit in Total War 3 Kingdoms. So all the synergies are there, and this is clearly designed for him because he is known to play a lot of cards, to trigger combos like the Yellow Turban, to trigger combos like the Repeating Crossbowman. Here, we can use this as an after effect. You get this on the board first, and then you do your Scribe combo on turn 7, which makes perfect sense because Scribe combo costs 6, and now you can't reduce it by very much because of the new change to the Persuasion. You can, have this work out for you. So, pretty interesting change. Aside from that, no other cards, stats or card text change. There's just some effects change. So like Pyrrhic Victory no longer destroy unbreakable cards. False Dawn used to have a issue where you can't play it if there's like an unplanned card in hand. Now you can play it anytime. That was a bug. And then cards that are drawn as a result of Camel Nomads wouldn't always take on the cost change of Stone Bridge or Border Guard. That's also some sort of coding effect that's got changed. Scribe would trigger its effect when destroyed, which is inconsistent with all other similar effects. So now if your card is Pyrrhic Victory or some sort of damage card that would destroy it, it would not draw you the card. It would just get it destroyed. And that's pretty much it. All the other stuff is like getting more deck slots, up to 20. Now, I'm not the type to stash decks. I pretty much make one, test it out. If I like it, I showcase it, and I just get rid of it and create another one. I like creating new decks, so having extra slots not an issue for me. And then there's some changes to the premium cards we talk about. There's also a change to the board. The UI is a little bit different, but not that different. We'll get to see it when we do deck showcase this weekend. So hope you guys enjoyed this one, and definitely have fun learning this new meta. And until next time, bye!